My name is Lotta Stern. I'm a sociologist and also the deputy CEO of the Ratio Institute. And I will moderate the seminar today and make sure that people keep time, because we will end today at 1:15 at the latest. So if it's your first time here, Ratio is a private research institute focused around conditions for improving the enterprise system. As part of that mission, we do labor market research, among other things. And one area representing a challenge in today's labor market is a skill mismatch. An issue researchers at Ratio has spent a fair amount of time studying. And I think it is fair to say that one of the culprits in this mismatch is higher education, the topic of today's presentation. And perhaps the expansion of higher education. So with us here today, we have three highly educated individuals who knows about this system of higher education. And Bryan Caplan will start us off by making the case against education. We also have Anders Flodström and Nils Karlsson here to comment on Bryan's presentation. And I will introduce them briefly when it is their time to talk. But before we start, I want to tell you something about the structure of today's seminar. One of the most important things for you to know is that we are recording this seminar, so be aware of this fact. We also will ask you to ask only clarifying questions after Bryan's presentation to help us keep the schedule. And then we're going to invite you all to ask questions or make comments after our two discussants have had their share of saying. So, that's it. It's quite straightforward. Then, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker today. It's Professor Bryan Caplan of George Mason University. Professor Caplan is an economist and the author of many books, one of which entitles this seminar, The Case Against Education: Why the Educational System is a Waste of Time and Money. Quite depressing for a lot of us. But Professor Caplan is much more than just an economist. He's very non-boring, for one thing. He also is a blogger, and he blogs with Econlog. He's also working on a graphic novel together with Zach Weinersmith on All Roads Lead to Open Borders, just to give you a picture of this here today. It is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Caplan to Ratio today. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I wrote slides for assuming I had more time than I do, so I am not going to increase the speed. I'm going to reduce the content, but you can speed read the extra slides as I whiz by them. All right, that's the cover of the book. All right, let me begin with the normal view of education. At least it is normal in every other country I've been in. You can tell me whether it is the normal view in Sweden. The normal view says that we should have more and better education. Right, so if you are running for office in the United States, God help you if you say, do you know what we need? Less and worse education. No, everyone says more and better. This is also a rare case where economists and the public actually agree. My first book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, that I talked about last night, focused on all the ways where economists and the public diverge. Education is a rare case where there's a meeting of the minds, and economists say the normal thing. Why? Well, economists have been measuring the return to education. Basically, they're doing financial analysis of education as if it were any other investment for a very long time. And the usual result is that the return to education is quite high. So most economists look at these numbers and say, aha, this is the proof that education builds human capital. In normal language, it's the proof that education pours skill into the students. And that is why you make more money. You go to school unskilled. The teachers go and put skill into you. And then you are done and you say, now I have skills. And employers say, great, I would like to hire you for a lot of money. Which brings us to the big puzzle that motivates the book. When you actually experience education, it is hard not to notice that most classes do not teach job skills. Most classes teach you material you will never need to know again after the final exam. So then why would employers care? So what fraction of jobs in the US, or again, most of this applies to Sweden too, would ever use knowledge of history? Do you know a lot of successful historians? This is a common occupation in Sweden. I'm like taxi driver or historian, like common jobs, and they're probably not. Higher mathematics, again, quite rare. Music and art. These in U.S. schools, there are high requirements for the study of music and art. My sons, when they were in grades 4 through 6, had 3 required music classes. You can't get out of any of them. Everyone must do them. You must be in chorus. You must be in music appreciation. And you must dance. All right? And when I call the school, maybe they could just not dance? No. All must dance. All right. Now, one big difference between the U.S. and Sweden, obviously, is you learn foreign languages successfully. If you did not, you could not be listening to my talk. But in case you didn't know, Americans do not learn foreign languages successfully. In the book, I actually did find the data. What fraction of Americans even claim to have learned to speak a foreign language very well in school? And remember, we do it for years. It is standard to do 2 or 3 years of foreign language in high school. You must have 3 years to go to college, to go to a public college in the state of California, for example. And yet, under 1% of Americans even claim that they can speak a foreign language very well. And remember, this is self-scoring. It's, oh, I'm great. Only 101% will say I learned to speak a foreign language very well in school. Of course, many Americans can speak foreign languages extremely well, but they learn them in the home, not in school. All right. And of course, there is Latin, a dead language. When will you use that? So in American schools, I often remember there being a troublesome student in the back of the room raising his hand and saying, what does this have to do with real life? When are we going to use trigonometry? And the teacher would say, you'll see. You'll see. All right. And have you seen? So is Sweden a trigonometry-based economy? Have you? All right. All right. Now, again, what is so strange about this? What's strange is not that schools waste your time. There you might say, well, it's government schools. Governments waste time. What do you want? But the puzzle is that employers care. You learn something useful, or useless rather, and then employers say, oh my God, it's really important. You did Aristotle in that case. The job is here for you. So why would that be? Which brings us to the signaling explanation. Easy to explain all these facts using what economists call the signaling model of education. The idea is not original to me. So what is original to me is that I really believe it's true and important, and I defend it very energetically. The economist Michael Spence did win a Nobel Prize for this, but he did almost no empirical work on it. All right. So the main idea of the signaling model, it begins by saying, sure, some schooling works the way people say. Some schooling does teach you useful skills. Reading is useful. Writing is useful. Arithmetic is useful. People learn these in school. They use them on the job. There's nothing puzzling about that. All right. However, a lot of school is very different. A lot of it is what we call hoop jumping. You jump through a hoop. Look at me. I did this. Other people didn't do it, so I'm impressive. So you're trying to show off or to signal, or in other words, to convince or persuade employers that you are smart, that you are hardworking, and also that you are conformist, that you are obedient. Yes, master, I will do this. All right. Now, the key assumptions in signaling models, first of all, you need some hard-to-observe differences. So employers can't just look at you and say, he's great, he's terrible. All right. Secondly, the differences have to correlate with something observable like grades or diplomas. And finally, you need the higher productivity workers to have lower costs of doing the observable thing. The lower costs could be actually financial. For example, in the United States, where people usually pay for college, a good student finishes on time. An average student finishes after an extra year. So it costs weaker students more tuition to finish their degree. But it could also just be the pain of doing it. Right now, in signaling models, the market rewards people who show their stuff even if the display is totally wasteful. Why? Because it can convince people that you have desirable traits. All right. Why should you think that I'm right? Let's start with the ubiquity of useless education. So now this is data from the United States. You can tell me maybe I'm right. I mean, I'm definitely right for the United States, but maybe I'm wrong for Sweden. You tell me. All right. So in the US, if you look at high school course hours, only about 30% are spent on English and math, We have over 40% on arts, foreign language, history, social studies. And remember, we don't actually acquire any foreign language knowledge. So keep that in mind. It's not like you guys, like it makes you like you've done tremendous things with English, but Americans have done next to nothing with foreign languages. All right. Similar patterns for U.S. college majors. So I say under 25% of graduates have a vocational major that you can claim as vocational without laughing, right? So, engineering, yes, but archaeology, all right? It's just too funny, all right? So, all right. Economists often say, well, what about engineers? So, yeah, engineers, they do learn more useful skills, but it's about 5% of college graduates are engineers. It's actually a very rare major. And if you go to an American college, you can understand why, because the engineers don't really get to enjoy their college. They don't even have, they have vitamin D deficiency from being underground programming and doing their work, whereas, not just the English students, but the economic students are having a big party. So, all right. Now, but another thing that I do in the book, and this is actually what I think is more crucial, is I look at measures of adult knowledge. All right. Most of the time when we measure what people learn in school, we measure it at the final exam. All right, there's a big problem with this, which is that psychologists have studied memory very closely, and they have amazingly found that people forget material they don't use. In fact, they forget it at a very high rate. So what you really want to measure is how much adults actually know about the subjects they were taught, because of course, there's no reason for employers to pay you for skills that you used to have. They only want to pay you for skills that you have now. All right, so. In the U.S., researchers who measure adult literacy and numeracy find moderate levels of literacy and numeracy. Very disappointing. And also, a quarter to a third of Americans, very marginal literacy and numeracy. So I think you guys beat us on that, probably. I think in Norway they were arguing with me. So no, we're terrible too. Like, I don't think you know how terrible Americans are. Let me tell you. No, we're worse. No, you're worse. All right. But then also looking at knowledge of civics, history, science, and foreign languages. Here, Americans, despite studying the subjects for years, the average adult knows next to nothing. Right? The best way I can explain this briefly is imagine writing the easiest test you can think of about science or civics. So, like, which party controls Congress now? How many senators does each state have? These are very basic questions. And you give adult Americans this test, they will be able to get about half the questions right. All right, you might say, that's not so bad. I said, yes, it is. If someone only knows half the letters in the alphabet, are they half literate? No, they are illiterate. You cannot read if you only know half the letters of the alphabet. If you don't know which party controls Congress, you don't understand American politics at all. You were just completely confused. All right, now that's part one. Part two of why you should believe me is that this useless education still has very handsome rewards. Actually, education in the U.S., by the way, pays a lot more than in Norway, the U.S., or Sweden. I'm sorry, I've been moving around a lot, or both. So if you just look at the raw average, the average college graduate in the U.S. would make 73% more than the average high school graduate. So I've heard that's a much bigger difference. All right. But anyway, so the ubiquity of useless education would not be puzzling if the market rewarded education poorly. So if you said, here's my degree in archaeology, and an employer said, that's stupid, all right, then there would be no big puzzle. The puzzle is when employers say, ooh, a degree in archaeology, very impressive. All right, all right. So we can say is, at least in the U.S., the market rewards education very well. Yes, if you are a statistician or econometrician, you may say, well, shouldn't we make a lot of adjustments? And yes, you should make a lot of adjustments, but even after making a lot of adjustments, most obviously for the fact that people who go to college are better students to begin with than students who don't go to college. So the true effective education is smaller than it looks on the surface. It's not reasonable to say that if you take a random person and send him to college, that will raise his earnings by 73%. But still, after making a lot of adjustments, it still seems like there is a large causal effect of education on earnings. All right, what's nice about the signaling model is that it allows us to reconcile, to combine research on learning and research on earning and say you're both right. You're both right. People don't learn very much in school, but they still get a big increase in their earnings. And the signaling model says that makes sense. It's actually totally possible. All right, you might be signaling if. So I don't know if you know the American comedian Jeff Foxworthy, but anyway, he has this spiel. So you might be signaling if. First of all, you bother to enroll or pay tuition. All right, now you may have heard that you have to pay a lot of money to go to top American schools. That's totally false. Because if you want to go to Harvard, simply move to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and start attending classes. You don't have to apply, you don't have to pay any money, and no one will stop you. Right, so I was not a student at Harvard. I was a student at Princeton. But at American universities, there was no one at the door saying, "Show me your student ID. We don't want anyone learning for free here." All right, it does not work that way. You can learn all you want. Normally, if you want your work graded, professors don't even know who's in the class or who isn't in the class. They'll grade it. They say, "Look, I don't see you on the roster." "Oh, that's just a mix-up." "All right, whatever." Also, if you tell the professor, "Well, I'm not really a student here, but would you mind if I just took the class?" Most professors get a little tear in their eyes, and they say, "This has never happened in my entire career. Someone wants to learn what I have to teach. Oh, glorious day." All right, so there's just one little problem with getting free education in America. At the end of 4 years of getting free education at Harvard, there is one thing you will not have. You won't have the diploma. There will be no grades, no official record you were ever there. And as a result, virtually no one in the country does this. All right. This would be very odd if the main reason people went to school was to acquire skills. But it makes a lot of sense if the reason that you were there is to get a sticker on your forehead, grade A, approved. All right. You might be signaling if you worry about failing the final exam but not subsequently forgetting what you learned. How many people here have ever taken a final exam in a subject they did not like, did well, and then you never thought about it again? And yes, and if you were given that same final exam from 10 or 20 years ago, how well would you do? Very poorly. And yet, if you had failed that exam, your life would probably be very different, right? Failing that exam might have prevented you from graduating. You couldn't even have been considered for the job that you have, right? So for human capital, this makes very little sense because failing and forgetting give the same result. You don't have the skills anymore, or you never had the skills. But in the signaling model, there's a big difference, which is doing well in a class and then forgetting it still shows that you are trainable. It still shows, look, this guy used to know Latin really well. Does he know it now? No, but we don't use any Latin here. Oh, let's hire him. So, you know what? We hear you need to learn a very different pile of boring material, and if he could learn Latin, he can learn what we want him to learn. All right. You might be signaling if you don't think cheating is only cheating yourself. All right. So in the human capital model, if you go to school and you cheat to get good grades, you have just wasted your time. You have paid your time, you've paid your money, and then you didn't actually acquire skills, so the market will see right through you, realize you are a fraud, and you will not get any benefit. On the other hand, if the signaling model is right, the cheating allows you to impersonate a good student, which cheats two groups of people besides yourself. It cheats employers who thought they were getting someone good, and it cheats your fellow students because you are diluting the value of their signal. You might be signaling if you seek out easy A's. So here the A is the top grade, right? So standard thing for Americans is to say, well, who gives out the easiest grades? Who gives the best grades for the least work? And then say, I want to learn from that guy, or actually not learn from that guy. All right, very standard. On the website ratemyprofessor.com, there used to be an entry for easiness, and more easiness is good. All right, there was never an entry for teaches lots of job skills. All right, and then finally, you might be signaling if you will rejoice when teachers cancel class. Every time you say, look, there's just not going to be any class tomorrow. Yay! All right, look, if you are paying for this knowledge and someone says, you know what, we're going to keep your money and not teach you anything, and then you go, hooray, that would be very strange. On the other hand, if you are there to get the signal, it makes sense because if the teacher cancels classes, do employers know you studied with the easy teacher who canceled a lot of classes? No. So it looks just the same. So you get the same treatment from employers, but you have to learn and work less. All right, now what is wrong with signaling? Right, so who cares if education builds human capital or just signals it? Well, I'd say for the individual student, you probably don't care very much. It doesn't make much difference for one person. However, in signaling models, education has what economists call a negative externality. Best explained by a classic example. Suppose that we are all at a concert, we are all sitting down, one person wants to see better. What can that one person do in order to see better? Very simple, stand up. All right, one person stands up, that one person sees better. Does it follow then that if everyone stands up, everyone sees better? Of course not. And that is how education works in the signaling model. One person gets it, it improves their chance in the job market, they get higher earnings, better jobs, so on. But if everybody does it, this means that employers raise their expectations for how much education you have to have in order to be worthy of employment. A great implication of this is that if the signaling model is right, then when education increases, there will be what researchers call credential inflation. Namely, the amount of education that you need to get a job will rise. So if you're going to school to learn skills, there's no reason for employers to raise the requirements just because there's more people with the skills. Instead, you'll say, well, I don't need a PhD to weld. If you have welding skills, that's enough. On the other end of the signaling model, you might actually look and say, well, I have 300 applications. I don't have time to interview everybody. I think the people with the higher credentials will, on average, be better workers. So let's throw all the lower educated applications in the trash. So in the US, it really does look like over the last 70 years that within a given occupation, the degree that people need in order to get it has gone up by about a full degree, right? So it would now be very common for people to need a college degree for a job that their grandparents could have gotten with a high school degree, right? Again, so in the US, so I've heard at least from most Europeans that it's not quite as bad here yet. But don't worry, you can reach here. But in the U.S., it would be very common for waiters at nice restaurants to have college degrees. Very common for a bartender at a nice bar to have a college degree. All right, which again may seem crazy. Of course, it's crazy, but that is the system that we have. All right. Now, most of the time when I present this talk, even very normal audiences are agreeing with me and saying, yes, of course, yes, well, everyone knows that. And then I get to the first major policy implication. And this is where, no, not that, anything but that. All right, but I say it follows very directly. So my major policy implication is to drastically cut education spending. Why? To get less education. Why? Well, if increasing access has caused not great jobs for the typical student, but rather just credential inflation, then I say the way to get credential deflation is just to put the car in reverse and make education less accessible. Which again, people get horrified, but then people won't be able to advance. Actually, if my story is right, it will be no problem. All that will happen is that people start getting actual training at an earlier age. Because the actual way people get good at their jobs is not by studying Latin in school. It's through on-the-job training. It is through learning by doing. Right? If you want to train someone as a pilot, do you send him to a logic class, or do you put him in a flight simulator? Right? If you remember the Malcolm Gladwell book Outliers, he has this factoid that 10,000 hours will make you a master. All right. Subsequent research said no, that's overstated, but 10,000 hours will make most people competent. Right? And on the other hand, spending 10,000 hours doing logic will not prevent you from crashing a plane. If you just look, he's study a lot of logic, put him in the cockpit. This guy can fly it. No. Right? So we have one word for this. It's called austerity. Usually the word austerity has a negative connotation, like the horrible austerity policies. But this is a word I want to claim and adopt and say, that's my word. This is my cause. Austerity is the word for the common sense policy of saving taxpayer money. And saying, look, it's basically like a strict dad, where you come and say, Dad, I need 200 kroner. And I don't know what your dads are like, but my dad would have said, what do you need it for? Where are you going to spend it? It's like, don't spend it there, that's a ripoff. All right, or like, I don't know, that doesn't sound like a good thing to spend it on. You don't need that. All right, so that seems to me a very sensible, common sense thing to do when someone wants taxpayer money, to say, what do you need it for? What are you going to do with it? Let me see. What exactly is going on here? Like, what happened the last time I gave you this money? These are all great questions. Yeah, so austerity, it's a word I love, a word I believe in, and it's a word that Ratio should embrace. Austerity. Yes, it's a good thing. All right, so now, of course, the main objection people have is, no. We should not cut spending. We should spend better. Let us spend better. And my response here is, look, cutting spending is really easy. We know how to do it. It can be done now. We don't need further research on this. We can just start cutting. On the other hand, spending better is very hard. Spending better is very hard. There's been a great deal of work in it, great deal of disappointment. Right? And Now, what's striking in writing this book, I did discover there are many pedagogical techniques that seem very well, either very well validated as being effective or very strongly disconfirmed, highly ineffective. And yet, you can see that highly effective techniques, they've been known to be highly effective for decades. American schools hardly ever use them. And on the other hand, techniques that are known to be worthless, very widely used. All right, now you can look at this and you could say, well, we just need to communicate better. It's like, it's been 30 years and you're still not doing it. Or you could draw the conclusion that I draw, which is the system just isn't very interested in research. Teachers aren't interested in research. Administrators aren't interested in research. They just want to keep receiving money to be artists, to do their job in whatever way they want. So I say the best approach here is to cut spending immediately and then say, if you come up with a big improvement in your techniques, come back to us and maybe we'll give you some of the money back. All right. Now, minor policy implication is to make education much more vocational. So I understand you still have at least some vocational education in Sweden, moderate amount, not at the German or the Swiss level. The US is very strongly against vocational education. We have a strong ethos of college for all, right? So almost every student is prepared to go to college, even though all data say that 2/3 of them will not finish college, right? And why? Well, it goes against the American spirit, because to say, look, that kid is never going to finish college, at least very unlikely. Like Americans like to say, but there is a chance. There is a chance, right? And that's the American way. Look, every kid could grow up to be president. Like, well, could. I mean, he could win the lottery, right? But it's just very unlikely. But Americans do not like that. Again, there's this idea that, well, if college doesn't work out, he can always go and become a plumber. Like, yeah, or maybe he'll end up in jail because he's so frustrated that he's gotten that far in life and all of the advice that he's been given has been so bad. Right, so what I say is far better to do the German or Swiss approach, where kids who do not like academics start learning to do one or more jobs at a much earlier age. Right, this doesn't mean that you have to tell 12-year-olds, like, you are a plumber, right? But how about tell 12-year-olds, here are 20 different jobs that are common. Let's do 2 weeks each and see if there's anything that you like and are good at. There is quite a bit of research just on the private benefits of vocational education, saying that it's at least undervalued. But again, I mostly focus on the social benefits, saying that there's much less of a negative externality of acquiring actual practical skills, because there you really are learning how to do something. So when you go and learn to be a plumber, it's not primarily getting a sticker. You actually are learning a practical skill, which does enrich society. All right, let's see. So I've got one more slide here on the humanist critique, but let's see. How am I on time? I'm actually...
Oh,
yes. Yes.
That's my job.
Yes.
You are running out of time.
Okay. So why don't I'll just do a very quick version on the humanist critique. All right. So there are many critics that I've had who have said, sure, signaling explains the economic rewards of education, but Bryan is just a typical caveman economist who doesn't realize there's anything in the world but money. Right? So in other words, they say there's also a humanist case for education. I've had many school administrators, people in humanities departments saying the purpose of school was never job preparation. It was always to broaden minds and expand people's understanding of culture and so on. All right, now what's frustrating about the criticism is when they say Bryan never considers, is like, go to the table of contents. Chapter 9. I have a whole chapter on this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I did consider it. All right, so the quick version. I am not actually a caveman economist. When I'm in Europe, my first thought is, where are your operas? Take me to your operas, because there's not a lot of opera in the United States. So I personally do share these humanist ideals. I love ideas and culture. This is my life. But just because you have these ideals does not mean that they don't have to look at the world to find out what's happening, right? And you can't just believe that whatever people say is true and that intentions translate to results. So in other words, if colleges say, we are creating cultured, thoughtful citizens, say, okay, that's what you're trying to do. I agree you're trying, but do you succeed? The question of success, that is one where you do have to be a statistician and say, well, we have to look at the data. The fact that you want to do it doesn't mean that it actually does happen. All right. So what I say in the book, and I don't have time to go over the data, is that actually existing education barely delivers, at least in the United States. So Americans, including American college graduates, consume near zero high culture. despite the fact there's been a lot of effort to make them appreciate it, but it just fails in almost every case. Almost no one in the US sees opera for fun, right? I know it's higher in Europe, so maybe your system does actually instill love of culture, but the American education system does not instill much in the way of appreciation for ideas or philosophy or anything else. Right now, what about citizenship? There is evidence that education modestly changes students' political views, although most of the changes are just much smaller than people think. Right. So again, if you learn about American college students from Facebook, you'll think the normal thing that American college students do is to throw tomatoes at me. All right, hasn't happened yet, but like on Facebook stories, another mob of horrible students shout down a professor. Right, typical. Right, I can assure you, this is not the normal thing American college students do. The normal thing American college students do is not attend class. That is the normal thing for an American college student to do. There are, on any given day, there are 10,000 times as many people who didn't bother to go to class as there are who went there and then quoted Marx to the teacher and said, if you read Marx, you would understand. All right, so that's actually quite rare. So anyway, so most students are apolitical, and it's just, all right, anyway. But the mechanism is mostly what has been called the big sort. I can talk about this more in the Q&A, but it very much looks like the reason why more educated people have different views is not that their teachers successfully brainwash them. Actually, most teachers are too boring to successfully brainwash anyone. Instead, it seems that students, the students' opinions are changed through a peer effect. So if you go to college, then you're around other people with these views, and they tend to move you in their direction. However, from the point of view of society, this is much less beneficial than it seems, because if, for example, you move the socially liberal, economically conservative people to college campuses, you automatically isolate the remaining people, so they are then around other socially conservative, economically liberal people, right? And I think actually in the United States especially, you really can see this, where the social divide has not meant that the views that colleges teach have become common. Instead, it just means that the working class and the white collar workers' views just diverge more and more. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see.
Well, I promised to allow for clarifying questions. Is there any of those around? Something that Bryan didn't make clear? Yeah.
Oh, so maybe.
Oh.
My name is Staffan Persson. Do you hear better now?
Yes. No.
Okay.
I hear.
Now I came to think of Hadrianus' wall between Scotland and England. Historians have researched why did they build this wall, and after lots of research, they eventually agreed it was because of one reason: to keep those soldiers busy, so they didn't do anything stupid. And I think of this when you talk about these things. How do you keep all these millions of people busy doing something they perceive valuable if you implement your plan of austerity?
Right. So I say we would do what every other society around the world and throughout history has done, which is have people start working at a younger age.
Yeah. Sure. If it's a clarifying question, well, something that wasn't clear in the presentation.
You pointed out a big problem with this quiz to people, asking them who's in the majority of Congress, and half of them didn't know. So how do you address that problem? That seems to be a pretty big problem. Do you solve that by more and better vocational training, or kicking people out of college?
Right. So would vocational education improve Americans' knowledge of U.S. government? No. For starters, I would say right now we spend many years trying to teach them and failing quite abysmally. So one thing you might conclude is, well, I guess our teaching is terrible, and it seems like and again, if we were only putting in a few weeks, you might say put in more time. But since we're putting in 10 years and getting almost nothing, this is where I would say it looks like you're just bad at your job. And if someone says, oh, I've got a new technique, again, I would say, yes, first adopt your technique. Well, first we cut the spending, then you go and improve. Then we come back and see if you really have improved, and then maybe you get the money back. I think yesterday in my talk I did mention one of my alternative ideas is to, maybe I didn't say, anyway, an alternative idea that I have for raising the public's knowledge of civics is every year, a few weeks before the election, there's a national test of knowledge, and if you get a good score on the test, you get money. The end. All right. Now, first, what's good about this? First of all, of course, it gives people an incentive to actually learn in whatever way works, because apparently the existing system doesn't work very well. But more importantly, it gives people an incentive to remember, because you can retake the test every single year and get money every single year as long as you maintain the knowledge, right? So that, and again, I'd say if you just take the money we are wasting on civics teachers and put it into rewards for good scores, right? And again, like no reason a 10-year-old couldn't take the test, and if he gets a good score, the 10-year-old gets money. Why not?
Why not? Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much,
Sure.
Bryan. So I hope you're all still interested. And now it is time for me to welcome up to the floor Anders Flodström. He is one of the discussants today, together with Nils Karlsson. Anders Flodström is a professor of physics at the Royal Institute of Technology. However, he's not here today in that capacity, but in the capacity that he was the university chancellor, sounds very prominent, chancellor, Star Wars capacity almost, of all of Sweden's higher education. And in this capacity, he worked with reviews of the higher education system and accreditations of higher educational system. So it is with great pleasure I give the word to Professor Flodström. Welcome here.
Well, thank you.
Hold it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, in the present system, when you are in my age, you are no longer a professor at any Swedish university. You're sort of disposed of. The last 5 years, actually, I've been working for the European Commission. So I'm leading the education project for which is worth quite a lot of money, which called EIT Digital Academy, a European Institute of Innovation Digital Academy. And we work on developing education. And we work a bit like in the spirit of Bryan to work on developing skills needed in professional life. Not actually welding skills, but you need certain skills also in vocational work, I mean, especially perhaps in engineering. So, and I enjoyed reading your book very much. I think it was real fun. It's the same time you'd make some reflections, and the first reflection I make is education. I mean, what really, is there some sort of a deeper meaning? I think we all look upon research as creating a repository of knowledge that we will sort of have use for in the future and will build on in the future. For me, education is a bit like, call it humanity's soul, in a sense. They gives you a memory of what we learned, and it's transferred through education from generation to generation. And actually, in a talk with Svante Pääbo, it's an archaeologist and genealogist, he tried to claim that the reason why Homo sapiens really succeeded as compared to Neanderthals was education. They learned to transfer knowledge and use of knowledge and skills between generations. So perhaps, I mean, I would like to say there could be a deeper meaning. And in this deeper meaning, it doesn't matter if it's skills or knowledge or competences. It's just that we somehow have a transfer of that into the future. Useful, or perhaps not all of them so useful in the daily perspective. Then I like this with austerity, but unfortunately I think perhaps it's kicking in open doors. Because if you look at the actual figures of on how much you spend on education or higher education in both Europe and US, it's dramatically down. I mean, the number of students in a percentage of generation in US is less than it's been in a long time. And I think in US, so in a system where taxpayers do not pay so much, but rather, I mean, individuals, American colleges and universities are pricing themselves out with the tuition fees. I mean, we see it in my organization because we get an increasing number of American students traveling or coming to Europe to get their higher education because it's less priced in this case. If you look at the percentage of people in higher education in most European countries, it also goes down. And that's the reason there is that it's simply too much money to be able to ask the taxpayers for. Politicians do not trust that they can motivate an increase in education to the taxpayers. If you look at the Swedish election this year, you will see health, and health, because they believe that they can motivate that to the public. There is no one talking about that we need more education, more highly educated people in Sweden. We keep the numbers low. And especially, we keep the numbers low on the education programs that really cost a lot. And that means engineering education program and medical education programs. Instead, we perhaps put a bit more into teachers are less expensive to educate, and also in humanities and social sciences. So, but coming back to this, call it skills or competences compared to knowledge, I think what actually triggered this, call it the skills movement, if I name it that way, was a change in how we made money. If you look in today, I mean, in the BNP growth, I mean, in most countries, but 2/3 is innovation related, new things that and in the beginning, all these new things were sort of created by, well, using Harry Cheeseburger's word, by open innovation. It was the market, and if you just had the right vocational skills, you can transfer what the market asks for into new things. I think what's happening right now is when I talk to people that look upon what's going to happen in innovation, the new things that are going to be created, they always now say, what we need is not innovations, we need disruptive innovations. And then I ask them, what's a disruptive innovation? What is that that really changes something in a disruptive way? And then it always comes, well, we need a bit more research, we need a better understanding, we need to dig a bit deeper, we need people with an education to be able to do that. And then they are talking about they're not needing not only engineers any longer, they need PhDs, they need researchers. Even major companies look upon it this way. Why do you think Google work with quantum computing? I mean, which is a real, as deep you dig in computer science right now, because they believe in the disruptiveness and the future creation. So I think we have had the skills era for a while. I think we will get a bit more disruptive, and we will have a bit of more deeper research area and education a bit deeper for a while. And we probably will return to skills area a bit later again. So I think it's what you're seeing and what you're reflecting over is sort of is what's happening by time, going sort of up and down. Then I have absolutely agree upon you when it comes to this with examination. I mean, I gave a talk when I started as a president at Royal Institute of Technology, where I said that in 20 years, KTH will not mean the Royal Institute of Technology, it will mean the Royal Institute of Examination. And because what matters is the degree, and it gives a sign of what you have achieved. And it is a signal. Of course it is a signal. It takes a bit to get there. But when you look today, the signals is not that important. I think 14 days ago, the 6 major US companies, unicorns as they called, decided that when they were looking for new people and advertising, they should cut out college degree as one of the prerequisites for the recruitment. And instead what they did were they named 8 specific software developers education institutes, which were not academic, so which was purely vocational in software development, as where they would look for the new people. So I think the value system between how you use the value system is going to change, and I think it also going to change just by pure digital transformation. I mean, most of the companies today use some sort of gaming in getting and in recruiting, and in a gaming situation, you do not ask for degrees. You just ask for, I mean, the skills and the knowledge you chose in running the game. So I think your book is, I think it's very important because it puts sort of a spotlight on what's happening here, and I think it needs to be qualified in certain areas into a strategy, and I don't think we should go and ask for austerity. I think we should ask for a better education policy or strategy, I mean, from our governments. Thank you.
I actually have a couple of slides, but
They're right here.
I'll start talking.
Sure. So you don't want me to introduce you?
Please.
Yeah, he's so famous. Well, he is, at least at Ratio, because this is Nils Karlsson. He is the CEO of the Ratio Institute. He's also a professor of political science, and he was the director of the research program Competency for Growth. I mentioned this briefly when I introduced our topics for today, and without further ado, I give the word to Professor Karlsson.
Okay. I've read Bryan's book, and I recommend you to. I should move here.
Yeah.
Good place.
Behind the
Even?
tree. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's. I think you should all read it. Actually, it's a game changer, I think. Over the last 20 years, Sweden has more than doubled university education. We have tripled PhDs produced here in Sweden. We have prolonged the high school, especially the vocational part. I think we've seen within the whole system what's called an academic drift, more or less preparing everyone to become a PhD student and then a professor. So I think you're pointing your fingers to very strong fingers, to very strong, very important, very important problem here. And this is not Sweden, only Sweden, of course. It's the same more or less in the OECD area. And the consequence is that all our societies have a skilled shortage. So all of the OECD companies, governmental agencies, everyone is short of skills. And I think one of the problems is, in fact, this educational system that does not really deliver what it should deliver. I will have some critique as well, but I will say that the book is well researched. It's not just Bryan's ideas or opinions about things. So it's full of statistics, it's full of empirical proofs and so on, And I will add some Swedish figures to this as well. And let's see if this works. I think some of you have seen this slide before. It's from the levnadsnivåundersökningarna.
The level of living survey.
Sorry again?
The level of living survey.
The level of living survey. When they ask people, it's a survey actually, asking people, are you matched the skills, the background, the education you have? Does it match the job you have? And well, this is a time when early 1990s, and I've actually been involved with this myself for many years, when we started to expand this whole system. And so there's very few people who are undereducated in Sweden, actually. Very, very few people. Those are problematic because they can't even enter the labor market. So they don't have any skills at all, really, that are considered valid in a sense. Maybe they're very skillful, actually, but they don't even have, you know, a high school degree in something. Without a high school, you can't even get a job in Sweden nowadays. But then we have all these people who are overeducated here. So we've had this expansion of the educational system, and more and more people, as Bryan described in the US, have jobs that they're overqualified for in a sense, you know. And less and less are matched with the jobs they have. So I devoted 5 years in a research project with over 50 studies analyzing this, and we summarized this into what we call the competence puzzle. I haven't translated all, but I think the story is quite similar to yours. Actually, so this first piece here in the puzzle is about the quality and relevance of the education that's given. And we argue that these things go together in effect. But the major problem, disregarded problem, is the lack of relevance to the real life, to real working skills that you need in society. And in order to do this, you have to involve the employers a lot more. You have to offer apprenticeships, you have to offer trainee posts and so on. And we in fact argue that in all kinds of education, also in mathematics and at the KTH and so on, whatever, logic, you would need to do at least a semester or something on the job to acquire some additional skills, to interact with these more academic things that you learn. But in addition, I think that you missed this a bit, or at least it's underemphasized in your book, the role of a well-functioning labor market here. That's a puzzle to me in your book, that if it's all about signaling, and you not say it's all about signaling, but you say it's an 20-80 division here. So people of all the time they spend, you know, at university or in educational system, 20% is something that's really valuable. 80% is just signaling. I think that the well-functioning labor market would somehow filter this out in the end. And if you prove that you can really work and so on, it's a puzzle here that this premium for taking higher education in the US is so high, a lot higher than Sweden. It would even out after some years. That's what markets does. You know, they filter information. There's a discovery procedure going on in markets, and you're more or less discussing the entry into the labor market. So I think your book could benefit from having also discussion on the efficiency of labor markets. In Sweden, we have a huge problem here. We have the security on the job legislation, a very compressed wage schedule, very centralized wage formation system, and so on, making investments in higher education often not really valuable. So I would say that the premium, sorry, I'm standing on the right place, the premium for taking higher education is perhaps a third or a fourth of the US, something like that. Also, that's our argument here, it's a bit outside this, but during life you also need to upgrade your skills and so on. So that's the project. So coming to my more critical questions, apart from the one I already made. I've been studying all my life, basically. basically, just like Bryan. and sometimes a bit for fun, but also I think quite seriously. I say that the most valuable thing I studied, and I was at Uppsala University for 10 years. I studied everything more or less. It was theoretical philosophy and practical philosophy. And I'm not kidding. I mean, that was extremely useful. We had a very small class. We were 6 people back in those days. And you really learned how to think and how to solve problems, how to analyze things. Skills that are generic, I would say. I wasted a lot of time studying classical economics. I was able to de-educate myself later on, acquiring some other skills that was more useful in life, I think. But I would really say that what education can do, and I think in your talk you're less radical than you are in your book, can give generical skills that will be especially valuable in a globalized, digitalized, disruptive, well, fast-changing world, really. The problem with vocational skills is that sometimes they're so focused on specific skills in specific occupations that will be gone in 5-10 years. So that would be, I think, we need a discussion about generic vocational skills. I think we have skills like that as well, but also the kinds of generic skills that you can get in education. But that said, I'm very much in favor of your analysis and your conclusions. And just to mention an example that we discussed yesterday briefly, Bryan, is Switzerland. In Switzerland, I think 80% of the kids at the high school level go into vocational training. So only 20% go into a preparatory thing for academic studies and so on. So 80% go to vocational training. And as you know, Switzerland is a very rich country, very dynamic country. We may think it's conservative in certain ways, but it's apparent that vocational training can be a very productive thing to invest in. And I definitely think we should invest more in that. And we should cut down, I think, actually, the number of people who go to more academic studies. The average or the median age of entering the labor market today in Sweden is 29.2 years. So it takes such a long time. Everyone is supposed to have a master's degree nowadays. It's not enough to have an undergraduate degree. So it's a waste of time, actually, and money. Thank you very much. Shouldn't Anders come back, or?
I was thinking that we would give the word to Bryan first, if he wants to say something about the comments presented, and then I will open up for a more general. And then, please, Anders, come up again. Oh, do I have to do something? Yeah. Behind the, look at me. Let me do it. Skills. Turn around. See, something like this, I think. Cool?
And there we are. Right, and there we are. All right. Very well. So just some quick comments. Let's see. So for Anders, in the book I do go over some of the evidence on whether higher education contributes noticeably to economic growth. I think this is an area where researchers desperately want to find that it does, and yet most of the research in the end says, well, we're having a lot of trouble finding this. Again, one possibility is the research isn't very good. But I think another possibility we should consider seriously is that while higher education does turn out some useful products, it also sucks people that would have done something practical into a totally abstract world where they just talk to a few of the professors and then die. So, and I feel like I have known many brilliant people who could have contributed a great deal to the world, but they decided they wanted to do a PhD in Spanish literature, and that's the last you heard of them. That's all they're doing, and it's not going to lead to anything. So, higher education really is a place where someone that wants to consume their own ideas can spend a life doing it. So it's worth considering. On education separating mankind from the animals, if education just means any kind of learning, then that's right. But of course, so at least in the US, education normally means formal education. I have had some people say you should have called the book The Case Against Schooling, not The Case Against Education. And my reaction was, I don't want to start by arguing about a word on the cover of the book. I just want to use the word that other people are using and get to it. But still, there's a big difference between the transference of actual practical skills from generation to generation and the transference of skills that people almost never use from generation to generation. Let's see. So at least for the US, so I don't know European data that well. I know for the US that spending on all levels of education has continued to go up. Yes. No, yes. Let's see. I don't think so. Yeah. So again. Yeah. So again, at least I checked on the numbers recently, and 70% of American high school graduates do some kind of college, or so I don't think it has fallen actually. When you hear that U.S. education costs a lot, it's important to remember that it costs a lot in the same way that buying a ticket on an airline for a flight tomorrow costs a lot. Namely, most people on the flight don't pay that price, right? So actually, if you go to a web page, you will see the list price. The actual price that people pay in the U.S. is far less than that. So actually, if you look at net tuition for the U.S., so this is the amount of money that people pay after all the discounts and scholarships and so on, then it is much less than you would think. It's about $4,000 a year, which may seem like a lot to you, but isn't. But is not. But don't look at Harvard and think most Americans are paying Harvard tuition. That's just not true. So I would say I don't think it is like kicking an open door or kicking in an open door. And again, my understanding is in Sweden still college is free, right? So how is that an open door for austerity? Seems like that is a bank vault door for austerity, but I'll try kicking anyway. And then on the question, do we need educated people for disruptive innovation? Right now, of course, we'll often see that highly educated people do disruptive innovation. There are some famous dropouts who have also done a lot of disruptive innovation. I would not put too much weight on them, but again, just say that in a world where almost all talented people get a lot of school, of course you will see that the great ideas generally come from college graduates. It doesn't mean that they learned anything in school that really helped them do that. Again, if they're in CS, then I think it's probably a different matter. Let's see. And then finally, on this question of, is the signal important anymore? I've actually talked to many employers who have said, no. Maybe what you said used to be true, but now all employers care about is skills. And then I say, well, do you employ any highly skilled people that that don't have much education at your firm? Well, not at my firm. My firm, everyone's got a degree. All right, yes. Well, so, I've talked to people in IT, and generally what they say is that while a very talented person can get a job at Google without the degrees, but it's really hard. You must be twice as good to do half as well. So for example, sometimes Google will hire people who win programming contests. All right, but when I've talked to people places like this, they say, well, how many contest winners did you hire? 5. All right, how many people with degrees from Ivy League schools did you hire? Thousands. So it just seems like while there are other routes, still actually, if anything, most people who have been in IT for a long time say it's become more credentialist. It's in the 70s and 80s that a self-taught programmer could do well. Now the problem is there just aren't that many good programmers who didn't go to college left, and so it's hard for people to get people to pay attention. Let's see. Then for Niels, so very perceptive that I was neglecting the well-functioning labor market, because if you read the book carefully, I'm not that impressed with how labor markets actually function, right? Which, again, is because this is not a work of libertarian ideology. It's a work of describing what I have seen and what researchers have seen, right? So in the book, I talk about many things that seem highly dysfunctional labor markets. Now, again, you may think of the American labor market as right out of Charles Dickens, where employers fire you the second you aren't doing well. But again, there's a lot of research saying that even in the United States, there are many employers, if they accidentally hire a bad worker, they rarely fire them. American employers, yes, American employers, hard-hearted, greedy American employers, still will often refrain from firing someone that seems nice, even though they're not very good at their job. Now, this is why I say signaling matters more than it would seem, because employers are reluctant to fire. This means that you need to be careful about who you give a chance to. You don't want to say, let's hire people, and then everyone who's not good, let's fire them, because even Americans feel sorry for people when they have to fire them, right? And when people realize, wait, I don't want to give you a chance because I might feel sorry for you once I get to know you if I get rid of you. Therefore, I won't give you a chance. There is a lot of that we see in the data. So that is a problem. Now, there is some research on does the payoff for education decline over time, and the usual result that it does, but very slowly, right? Which I think partly it could be explained just by reluctance to fire. Another possibility, actually, let's see. Yes, people, well, there's that possibility. However, another possibility is that when employers decide they want to get rid of an employee, normally there's actually a special word for this. We call it de-hiring. De-hiring. What is this? Well, tell me if you've ever heard of this happening in Sweden. There's a firm with a bad worker, and the employer doesn't want to get rid of him. So instead, the employer goes to the bad employee and says, you need to find new opportunities. It's very important for you to find another opportunity. You have 3 months to find another opportunity. During that time, you're still officially employed here. You still get paid. And if anyone calls asking about what kind of a worker you are, we'll say you're great. And then you can move on and become someone else's problem. All right. And this is rampant in the United States, actually, and I suspect it happens in Sweden as well. I don't know, you can tell me. So I think if that's another way in which the labor market is dysfunctional. Right now, of course, I still want to blame the government to a large extent because it's the government that heavily subsidizes one of the worst systems. So if the subsidy was withdrawn, I think there would be a lot of other methods that would arise. So, and I'm certainly not saying government is blameless, but saying there's a combination of business pathology and government pathology, which leads to a overall system that doesn't work very well. Then on this question of how to think and generic skills, again, this is one where economists are very attached to the idea that vocational education just prepares you for one job, but academic education prepares you for lots of jobs. And there is a lot of research on this in educational psychology just saying it's not true, and academic education prepares you to be a professor. Academic education also prepares you for one job. It's just a job you will almost certainly never have. If you're in this room, then you may have. Then you're a lot more likely. But most of my students don't become professors, right? That's just a fact, right? And again, so what does this research say? It just says that while we might like to think that schools are teaching a lot of generic skills, when we actually test and measure, we don't see much of these effects. Instead, learning seems to be highly specific. It's a lot more like learning to fly a plane than it is like learning to be a logician, right? In particular, they find people are just bad at applying what they learn in one context to another context. Someone could be great at mathematical logic. It does not mean that they will be able to deduce on a menu which item to order, right? And in fact, these are two very different skills in the real world. So again, now when I was interviewing with Niels yesterday, I'm very happy to believe that Niels acquired great skills in philosophy, right? You know, if Niels tells me that, I believe him. All right, but this is not normal. Most philosophers are not do not run think tanks. They don't have a lot of practical skills. I know a lot of philosophers. Maybe they can teach philosophy, but for their other skills, they seem quite weak. So, you know, I'd say generally these skills just don't generalize. And again, now, could there be another kind of education that would do for everyone what philosophy did for Niels? I hope so, but I'm waiting around to see the evidence. So thank you. I'm just going to sit here.
You guys also want to sit down, perhaps?
Yes.
So it's time for us to open up for audience questions. And I see your hands flying up here.